Welcome back into the Tell Me teaching series, and let me address myself to the pastors for this particular class today. We're going to be dealing with a question, and this question is not a common question in terms of the language that is used, the terminology that is used, but it is one that is discussed openly and widely, and I want us to understand that. And the question that we're going to deal with today in our doctrine class under the doctrine of God is, what is the teleological argument for the existence of God? The teleological argument. I didn't say theology or theological. I said the teleological argument for God. That's a completely different word. Okay? And I'm going to spell this out word for you. It's T-E-L-E-O. T-E-L-E-O. Logical, the teleological argument, not the theological argument for God, but the teleological argument for God. And we're going to be addressing that issue in this particular class because we've had enough questions come in to specifically ask, especially now in light of the fact that there's a lot of conversation in the media, there's a lot of conversation among scientists, there's a lot of conversations in the universities about artificial design or intelligent design. We're hearing all that today. It's amazing. Every subject goes full circle. So we're going to be dealing with this subject. Now, this subject is not a quick, easy subject to deal with. There are concepts here that if you're not used to them, okay, at first they're a great challenge. And I remember when I was in seminary, we had to deal with this with our professor. And, we just sat there just dumbfounded, trying to figure out what was he actually saying to us, okay? And he just kept repeating the concepts very slowly, and he began to illustrate it for us, and we were able to capture the notion, the nucleus of the subject matter. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, is what is the teleological argument for the existence of God. And the reason we're doing that is because we have so many questions on this particular issue, especially in light of intelligent design and artificial design. So what we're going to do, we're going to open our Bibles and we're going to go to the book of Psalm. And I want you to go to the book of Psalm, chapter 94, verse 9. Psalm chapter 94, verse 9. Now, many of us in the pastorate, we've read these verses, okay? But we've never put them in the context of systematic theology. Okay? That's what we rarely ever do that with them. And I want to look at this particular verse because listen to the words of it now. Remember, I'm teaching out of the New American Standard Version of the Bible. You are teaching, you may use the King James English Standard Version, King James, NIV, and then because we have a lot of pastors, our international pastors, you have a lot of distinct languages and versions of your Bible. So just follow along with me in the New American Standard Version of the Bible. And let's look at verse 9, Psalm chapter 94. It says, "He who planted the ear, does he not hear? He who formed the eye, does he not see?" Listen to it carefully again. "He who planted the ear, does he not hear? He who formed the eye, does he not see?" And I want to draw your attention to that particular verse, because we're going to deal with this question, okay? That is, what is the teleological argument for God? What is teleology, okay? And so I want to deal with that. First of all, you have to understand that the subject matter, this particular concept, okay, of the teleological argument for God, okay, you have it from a theological perspective and you have it from a philosophical perspective. Now, philosophy relating to or involving the explanation of phenomenon in terms of the purpose they serve rather than the cause by which they arise. From a philosophical position, okay, the teleological argument of God is dealing with this issue, relating to or involving the explanation or the phenomenon in terms of the purpose they serve rather than the cause by which they arise. So, in the teleological argument for God, what we're dealing with from a philosophical perspective is, what is His purpose? Okay? Rather than getting hung up, where did it come from? Where its original genesis comes from. So now, the teleological narrative of progress. That's really what we're talking about. Okay. Theology now is a little bit different. Theology is relating to the doctrine of design, and the purpose in the material world. Okay. This is what we would call the teleological view of doctrine, or the teleological view of nature. Now, we ask a simple question, okay? What is teleological in simple terms? Okay? Well, teleology, okay, has the basic meaning of the study of the ends or the study of the purposes. That's really the most simple way of stating it, okay? And still you're going, well, what are you talking about? Well, patient, look, a teleologist, okay, attempts to understand the purpose of something by looking at its result. That's what he's trying to do. Okay, a teleologist is trying to understand the purpose of something. Okay, by looking at its results. So, what would be an example of teleology? Okay, what would be an example of teleology? Well, what then is teleology? Okay, well, ethics. Okay. It deals with this issue as well, okay? And when we look at the explainer by the Ethics Center, for example, okay, it takes a long, and we go, well, let's take this. And I remember having this conversation, and we were in Zimbabwe, okay? We were in Zimbabwe, and we were going from village to village out in the bush, and we were walking long stretches. And in this particular trip, we must have done close to 60, 70 kilometers, where we walked through, going from village to village, and we were evangelizing. And with that, I had a group of pastors with me. And we were talking about how it was important about evangelizing, and we had to go out there into the villages and go put and they kept telling me, well, the distances are far, they're long, and and I said, that doesn't matter. Our call is to go eat. It's to go. The Great Commission, Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20 says, go therefore ye and make disciples of all the nations, right? And so he said, go. There was no limitations as to where we had to go. I said, let's go. We're going to walk. There are no roads. We had to walk. Okay? There was one main road, and then you got dropped off, and then you would just walk forever, what seemed to be forever. Well, on one of these trips, we were in there walking, and the pastors began to ask questions, and they had not realized they were asking philosophical, teleological questions. And I caught that, and it caught my attention now, not because I'm super spiritual, super intelligent. It's because it brought to mind immediately this class on doctrine, the doctrine of God that I was taking at the seminary, and remembered that the professor began to explain, okay, the animal world or the animal kingdom to us. And he was giving examples about whales and sharks and octopus and so forth, okay? And he was talking about why they were designed the way they were and what the purpose. And he goes, you can see the purpose for their physical structure. And the question became, and I relate that to you because this is how I made the connection as we were walking, and we probably had about another 3 kilometers to get to the next village, and we're walking, we're talking, and we're looking around us, and giraffes, these humongous giraffes appeared, okay, on the horizon, okay, and they crossed our pathway, and we stopped. And one of the pastors said to me, he says, I've lived here, I'm born here, lived here all my entire life. I still don't understand why giraffes have these long, and this is how he said it. He said, long, and we kept looking at him, he said, long necks. And you go, well, Brother Eddie, what does this have to do with this question of teleological argument for the existence of God? Everything. And I looked at him and I said, well, you take the long neck of a giraffe. Well, let me give you a shorthand teleological explanation of this trait. Might be that evolution gave giraffes long necks for the purpose of reaching less competitive food sources. How many animals climb up on top of the trees to get their food source? So we're talking about purpose, results. I can't explain to you the design of the long neck of the giraffe, but I can clearly see its purpose because the giraffe doesn't have to compete on the ground for food. And they looked at me and go, oh. And I said, you don't realize you just asked a philosophical, theological, teleological question. which many people ask, but have no clue that they've asked a philosophical, teleological question for the existence of God. Okay? So now, what is the teleological argument for God? Well, the teleological argument for God is an attempt. It's an attempt to prove the existence of God that begins with the observation of the purposefulness okay, of nature. So the teleological argument moves to the conclusion that there must exist a designer. This just did not happen on its own. That's the point of all of this, okay? And so when people want to get into an argument about the Big Bang Theory and that somehow you had two atoms, okay, that just randomly just move through gazillions and gazillions and centillions, okay, of kilometers and miles, and somehow one day they found themselves kissed and kaboom, okay, out of pure chaos came order. And that's pretty much the scientific community and the university community. And so I want you to understand that. So now I deal with students who've gone to the public universities in many, many countries in Africa. I deal with the students who go to public universities in the country of Pakistan, in the country of India, for example, in Indonesia. Okay? And so they get into these arguments with their professors about the existence of God. And typically they deny the existence of God okay, by reversing the argument, reversing the teleological argument for the existence of God. So that's the reason why we come to this question, because we deal with so many people at that level. Well, let's go back to the question. What is the teleological argument for the existence of God? Now, we just read here in Psalm chapter 94, verse 9, he says, "He who planted the ear, does he not hear? He who formed the eye, does he not see?" So the existence of God is proven how? By the order and the useful arrangement in the universe. Let me repeat that. So the existence of God is proven by the order and the useful arrangement in the universe. So the orderly world, okay, in which we live, clearly demonstrates that a great mind was behind its arrangement. That's what we're talking about here, okay? The scripture identifies God as that great intelligence. And so we see this a lot. In fact, now that I live here down in South America, in the country of Peru, I'm amazed how many university students that we speak to who are basically are practicing atheists. And what's even more stunning is that they almost all of them go to a Catholic university. That's even more stunning about this. Right? And we see this more and more. And they tell you, well, I'm basically an atheist. You know? And then I have to get into the argument, well, but you're a liar. Okay? And then we get into that whole argument. But I just want to stay to the scripture. Look. So the term, okay, teleological, or the term teleology, not theology, but teleology, refers to the explanation that appeals to design and purpose. That's what it refers and appeals to design and purpose. Now, the teleological argument claims that the appearance of design and purpose in nature implies there is a designer. Strictly speaking, this is I think we have to have a balanced approach to this as well. Look. Strictly speaking, this is only the evidence of a designer, okay? Not necessarily any specific being. Now, in practice, okay, the teleological argument are often paired with other ideas to imply the existence of a deity, okay, such as the God of the Bible. And that's the perspective that we come with this, okay? So teleology, okay, is a broad category that includes several narrower ideas such as fine-tuning, we use that term a lot, such as intelligent design, okay, such as irreducible complexity. And these are not words that we use in our everyday language, but we hear them especially when you hear scientists and philosophers being interviewed on the news, and you go, "What did he or she just say?" Well, teleological arguments are suggestions and these are the suggestions that deliberate choices by God are the most reasonable explanations for certain observations. Well, almost every debate, not everyone, but almost every debate over teleology, okay, involves defining reasonable evidence of design. Did you what I just said? That's what almost every debate deals with, okay? It involves defining reasonable evidence of design. Now, this simultaneously demonstrates both the greatest strength and the greatest weakness of teleological arguments. Now, in one sense, philosophers, okay, have struggled to objectively, to express the boundaries of the evidence of design. Now, remember that theology and philosophy, okay, and a number of centuries ago, okay, was part of the same curriculum. It no longer is today, but it was part of the curriculum. Now, teleological arguments are thus. This is how they get framed. They get framed in two words: likelihood or assumption. Likelihood or assumption. Okay, so teleological arguments are okay. You have to in which you have to understand that's how they get. That's usually how they get framed, or they get boxed in as well. The likelihood is this, and the assumption is this. Okay, and this leads to further debates. Okay, over applying what we would call mathematical probability. Okay, mathematical probability. Now, this is an area that I'm very well familiar with because I did teach mathematics. Okay, and it was one of the things that I enjoyed the most because one of the benefits of understanding mathematics and teaching advanced mathematics and studying it is that it teaches you to take very complex ideas, complex equations, okay, and reduce it to simple responses, simple answers. Now, the process of learning that is what teaches you to take complex ideas and to logically work them down to a logical conclusion. And that's the reason why, for example, many excellent Bible students, okay, Bible teachers were very good at math, because that's one of the biggest benefits of mathematical study, is to teach you how to take complex ideas, complex mathematical equations, okay, and reduce them to something that makes really sense, and you have these aha moments, okay? Now, and so I want you to understand, so the teleological arguments for God, okay, or the likelihood or the assumptions, okay, has to many times deals with a great deal. It deals greatly with mathematical probability, okay. Now, on the other hand, and I'll come back to that in a moment. On the other hand, the teleological arguments often run counter to the principles used in virtually all the other circumstances, okay, and every other field of study, okay, that you may have. One of the things that you're gonna that you will discover is that when we get into these conversations and we get into these theological, teleological, philosophical arguments, okay, what happens is that it almost stands out here by itself here. Okay, this is where it stands right here by itself, because all the other arguments and all the other fields, okay, don't deal with the mathematical probability argument by and large. Okay. So I want you to understand that. Now, the teleological arguments, okay, broadly paint the picture, broadly suggest that some observations are more reasonably explained as resulting from purpose. What is its purpose, okay? And resulting from purpose and design rather than random accidents, okay? So if we were to take a patch of sand, okay, like that is all of a sudden, we're walking and it's shaped like the letter C, okay, would typically be interpreted as something, well, that's kind of random. You're walking out in the middle of the desert and you see this thing, okay, that's kind of random, okay. Well, now then you go, well, yeah, that's kind of random. The wind blew such a way, the wind coming down through the valley over the mountains, and it just kept doing it, and it formed a sea. Okay, that's pretty random. Well, but what if you are walking through the desert and all of a sudden you see a perfect circle? A perfect circle, and you see a perfect circle in the sand. That wouldn't that not raise questions? Okay. Or what if you saw 10 perfect circles arranged to look like a human face? Would that not cause observers to naturally assume, that there was some prior, some prior intentional action? Would that not be true? Mm-hmm. Or what if you saw this large furrow, a ditch, and it's carrying water from one puddle to another, and would be interpreted differently than you just saw this one furrowed large ditch. It's just carrying water from one puddle to another. Hey, you would interpret that very different if you saw a long, thin ditch, a long, thin furrow that is as straight as can be, bringing river water directly to the farmer's field. You would go, no, that's intentional. You will see, that's intentional. Okay. So you're beginning to understand what I'm talking about here, okay? And you go, well, why are we talking about this? Because this is how many agnostics and atheists, begin to attack the existence of God. And they get caught up in these philosophical debates, of probabilities, And they always seem to have an answer for this. Well, arguments for design, are more intuitive than they are objective. So they can be, and because that's the nature of it, they can be difficult to assess. That is true, which is why we have to work from the concept of the preponderance of evidence, circumstance, and it just builds on top of each other. It just continues to build. And you go, yeah, that has to be God. That has to be that. There is an intelligent design behind that. Okay. So now, in strict logical terms, which is now we're going to move from the theological, from the theological, the philosophical to the teleological. Now we're going to move to the logical terms. In strict logical terms, many events that we interpret as intentional could be the result of something random. It could be. Right? Now, improbability, which is different from probability, improbability does not necessarily imply intent either. At the same time, and for the same reason, teleological arguments derive great strength from the extreme odds that are involved. Did you hear what I just said? Let me repeat that. Because when you look at this thing, teleological arguments, derive a lot of great strength from the extreme odds that involve. You go, that just can't be, that just could not have happened by itself. Just because something is possibly random does not mean it is reasonable to assume it really was an accident. So this is the reason why we have to delve into the arena of intent, by observation. Now, as an example, let's just now, just kind of let's just give an example that many of us know. Now, because I have so many pastors online, you're from so many different countries. I can only give you an illustration from my perspective, from the world that I came from. And I remember I was raised in New York City, in the United States, and people would play a card game called poker. And they would play poker for money. I mean, this is serious, at the end of the day, I mean, I'll tell you how serious it is that people showed up with guns, They just didn't trust each other, but they play that game, poker, And poker is gambling, Now, so I want to give you an example from that world in terms of mathematical probability, in terms of what's reasonable to interpret, what's reasonable to accept, what is acceptable, and then what is the improbability, or the extreme odds that are involved here that this could have happened. So just be patient with me. Now, take the game of poker. It's a card game. And in this game, players are dealt 7 cards each, right? They flip it out and they deal, And then the player has to select 5 cards out of the 7 cards as a combination, and he throws 2 cards back in, right? And now he's got to sit there. He's got 5 cards in front of him, Now, cards are randomly dealt from a deck of 52 cards. Okay, and then they're split into 4 suits. Okay, you have let's see if I remember. You have hearts. You have clubs. You have diamonds. Okay, and you have spades. Right. So you have hearts, clubs, diamonds, and spades. Those are the 4 suits. Okay, and then each suit has 13 cards each. Right, 1 through 12. Okay, you go 1 through 9, 1 through 10, and then you have a joker. Okay, you have a queen and you have a king. Okay, so and then you have this ace. This is how you get to the 13 cards. Okay, now the ultimate hand, or the perfect hand in this game, okay, is what they call a royal flush. A royal flush, which includes the top 5 cards in a single suit. Okay, now let's go back to mathematics. Mathematic probability. Okay, now the odds of obtaining this hand from a fair deck, an honest deck, okay, is about 1 in 31,000. It's 1.310 exponent. Okay, but let's just put it in simpler terms. It's the probability of getting that hand a straight flush. Okay, is 1 in 31,000 times that those cards are dealt. You understand that? Now, but let's take this to a more. Let's just extend this argument out for a little bit further. Okay. If a player was to obtain a royal flush, other players would be disappointed, but likely to accept the outcome as possible. Wow. Yep, that is. I mean, that's what they hope. That's what they dream for. Okay. Now, if the same player, listen to me carefully, if the same player obtained, okay, a second royal flush in the next hand, the opponents would naturally suspect something is underhanded here. It is possible, okay, a person could get 2 consecutive royal flushes. Yet the odds, the extreme odds of this, okay, are happening. Of this happening is about 1 in 957 million chances. Now, do you see the probability and the improbability of this? Okay, mathematically, now listen to me carefully. Mathematically, it's even possible to be dealt 5 royal flushes in a row, albeit at the odds of 1 in 28 septillion, okay, opportunities or chances. However, none of the other players sitting at that table, okay, would accept the randomness as a valid explanation. People are whipping out guns, okay, and they go, somebody's cheating here, okay? The likelihood of that happening by pure chance is so, how would I say, is so vanishing, okay? It's so vanishingly small, okay, that it is far more reasonable to assume somebody is cheating here. At the very best, the other players would demand further investigation. Now, and you understand that, okay? Attempting to refute, and let's go to the other side of this, okay? Attempting to refute teleological arguments for God's existence, okay, often results in a similar quandary as well. Okay? Some arrangements of nature are so improbable, yet so necessary that they would demand interpretation as a result of what we would call fine-tuning by an intelligent mind. Okay? Now, dismissing appearance. Dismissing appearance of design by appealing to some blind luck opens the door to rejecting almost all scientific knowledge as well. Ignoring the implications of probability makes experiential observations then meaningless. Okay? Sometimes mathematical probability cannot be objectively assigned. Okay? Even then, common sense principles, okay, lend weight to what we would call the teleological arguments. Now, this is where we would take things, for example, as ratios and odds, Ratios and the ratio of this happening and the odds of this happening, they're not involved. Okay, they're not involved in concluding. Watch out for the sharks, for example. Okay, now I lived in Los Angeles, California. Okay, and from time to time they have to put up a sign. Watch out for the sharks, and it'd be carved in the sand on the beach. It was written on, and that was written on for purpose. Okay. You don't have to work with a lot of odds and ratios on that, because you can. We've experienced this, okay? Nor does a person need a calculator to decide whether an arch stone bridge that was built, okay, across a river was an accident. Okay, no, somebody designed that. Okay. Some patterns and arrangements are what we would call universally associated, with intentional action. Okay, when you see bridges, a bridge is a bridge all around the world. Now they may get a little more fancy and do the architectural designs, but pretty much the same principles are always there. Okay, yet these same principles, listen to me carefully, yet these same principles are often ignored, okay, when attempting to refute theological arguments for God. For instance, those who presume the outrageous sophistication of DNA, which is an actual code, by the way, okay, formed without any greater purpose, or ignoring the logical implications of the existence of that code. I mean, it's pretty much established. DNA is DNA. Okay? And somebody said, well, nobody knows what's that there for. Stop the ridiculousness, okay? Now, another aspect, okay, of the theological arguments involves situations that are not only improbable, but seemingly impossible. Now, let's go back to that card game for a moment, okay? In the card game example, okay, it is theoretically possible for 5 random hands to be dealt, okay, from a fair deck, an honest deck, to result in 5 royal flushes. Okay, so theoretically this can happen. Now, so remember, let's go back, okay, because it kind of gets a little dicey out here. Okay, we're talking about teleological, theological, okay, and now theoretical. Okay, and so now theoretically that could happen. Okay, I mean, all the components are there, the same 52 cards are there. It could happen, okay? But if a player was dealt 2 of the same card, such as receiving 2 kinds of diamonds, okay, it would prove that either the deck or the dealer is not fair. Somebody's cheating here. This is the case with issues such as we will call, and listen to this stuff. It's called abiogenesis. Abiogenesis, okay? And you go, what the heck is that? Well, it's abiogenesis, okay? Genesis is the beginning, okay? Bio, okay, is life. So when you put an A, like atheist, theo, okay, is a negation, okay? And atheist is, but the letter A would say is to negate that theos exist. That's what an atheist. Okay, so if we were to take the word abiogenesis, okay, abio, it says it denies life, that non-life can produce life. That's basically what, and this is absolutely amazing. And you go, wait a minute, Pastor, what are you talking about? Oh, wait a minute, isn't that why we talk about artificial insemination? Isn't that why we talk about test tube babies? Isn't that why we're talking about that one day we're going to be able to create a human being in a test tube? Okay, and we're going to be able to do it from a non-life source. That's an actual. This is an actual study in science, and people are paying millions of dollars to do this. Okay, so because they want to create the so-called perfect human being, whatever that means. Okay, well. So abiogenesis, okay, is life arising from non-life, okay, which all scientific observations have demonstrated to be impossible. It's impossible. Non-life cannot produce life. Right? So nothing can produce Zoe, eternal life. You have to understand that, okay? But there's millions of dollars being invested to study this, okay? And so we understand that. Here's where our theoretical, okay, moves to the logical, and the logical says that can't happen. Now, if something cannot happen, according to certain, according to certain assumptions, but it does happen, then the assumptions are wrong. Teleological arguments leverage the apparent impossibility of certain things happening naturally. The more reasonable assumption is that something or someone is acting outside of the established rules, okay, of the system. So a common term when debating teleological arguments is what they call gaps. Gaps. G-A-P-S, gaps. Okay? And I got to spell that out because of my accent. Okay? Gaps. Well, critics frequently, they miscast, okay, teleological arguments as we don't know how this happened, so God did it. And now, now we go to this other extreme, okay? This is what's usually referred to as the God of the Gaps era. The God of the Gaps era, okay? Now, in some cases, this criticism has merit, okay? Now, reaching the end of our understanding does not necessarily imply that the next casual step is direct intervention of a deity either. Okay? And framed in that way, arguments in favor of God are logically weak. At the same time, mere pointing out the appearance of a design and intent is not the gaps era either. If something appears to be deliberate, considering the fact that it is not an argument for ignorance, it is a positive use of all the information. Now, those who are claiming, the God of the Gaps, okay, often confuse what we would call mechanism for agency. Mechanism for agency, okay? In other words, explaining how something happened does not logically explain it doesn't explain away intent. Right? And that's what we're talking about. Right? Arguments for design only require that certain situations strongly correlate with intent or purpose. Now, teleology, okay, does not require disproof of all of the mechanisms leading to the end state or leading to the end conclusion. Look, an automobile. So we were to take, for example, a vehicle, okay, an automobile, okay. Now, the beauty is that I don't drive anymore. I gave up my license. I don't have to do this anymore. My manhood is not defined by my ability to drive a car anymore. Okay? I know how to walk. I know how to taxi. I know how to do that. Okay, and besides, where I live, people drive absolutely nuts. Okay, and I kill somebody. Okay, but I want you to understand that. So let's take a car. Okay, an automobile. Okay. Now, automobile steering, okay, it involves multiple steps between the movement of the tires and the intent of the driver. Now, how do I know that? Well, when I was a young man, and I remember this back 1972, 73, I was at the university. I was studying at the University of Iowa in the middle of the country, of the United States, in the state of Iowa. And I had to work. I didn't have money, okay, and I didn't come from wealth, so I had to work, and I was married, okay, already, and so I went to work in an automobile factory at night, and the components of what we call the dashboard and the steering column and all that, okay, well, we built that. We will build it, okay, and we will form, we will cast it and do all that, and we have to work all night with these hot ovens and foam and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, the reason I explain that to you because the reason why I know something about this is because I actually did it, okay. I mean, I was a young man doing this, okay, and working my way through college. Well, and so you would have these steering wheel, and it involves multiple steps, okay, between the movement of the tires, the intent of the driver, okay, pointing out the existence, okay, of power steering, and then you have what was called an electronic control unit, okay, and then there was this entire series of machinery, mechanisms, okay, that now what you have to understand, but all of that would not excuse a driver who wrecks the car. See, learning how something happened does not mean there is no one who is behind it. Okay? So you need to grasp that idea. Look, it's also common to respond to what we call teleological arguments with the atheism of the gaps approach. The atheism of gaps approach. Okay, this simply says blind randomness cannot explain this yet, but we should assume we will eventually be able to explain it. This is especially common. It's a common tactic. Okay, when dealing with issues such as abiogenesis. Okay, where observations move. They move beyond, how would I say, they will move beyond improbability, okay, into what seems like impossibility. Okay? So, now, closely related are the claims of what we would call poor design, okay, where a perceived flaw is held up as a proof that the designer is inferior. Okay? And I'm going to give you an example of this, okay? Logically, this does not also this does not disprove this does not disprove teleology. Okay, it doesn't disprove its intent, because intent is intent. Okay, or even if it's fallible. Okay, it doesn't do that. Okay, such arguments are typically shallow. Okay, and now let me give you an example of this now. Engineers, for example, you take engineers, okay, often make valuable design choices that the end user, okay, won't intuitively understand, and you get frustrated. You just get frustrated, okay. So let me give you an example of this. Now, what do I know this to be true? Because also I worked in construction. I had to work with power tools and things, okay, and over a period of time, you began to notice that the equipment that you use, the power tools that you use, okay, they just didn't seem to last long. And you go, well, this is cheap, and we went from heavy metals to heavy aluminum and titanium, and now we're down to plastic and all kinds of stuff, okay? And the parts, and then you have to take in, your big tools in for repair and get them maintained and tuned up and so forth. Well, and then we complain, this thing breaks all the time, Well, see, the engineers made designs, but when they sell you the tool, they don't explain to you why they did it. You just buy it. You see the nice commercial, and you see this hand drill is working, it's doing a great job, and you buy it, right? And you try it out, and you get certain brands that you after a while. But what happens is we still don't have information about why it was designed the way it was designed. There is a purpose behind that design, but we perceive the design to have a flaw. And so you go, well, that was poor design. So which means you have a poor designer. That was a pretty mediocre job. Well, and I remember I had this big old power tool, and I had to take it in several times to be repaired. Okay, and so I'm talking to the guy, and I go, I paid a lot of money for this thing, but I'm trying to understand, why does this keep happening? Okay, and I got into an interesting conversation. Well, it so happens that the dealer, or the representative of the dealer, okay, of that particular power tool, happened to be into the shop that day. And he heard me. I'm asking the guy because the guy's a repairman, okay? I'm asking for an explanation. And the man, he asked to be, if he could interrupt into the conversation. He explained who he was. He goes, let me explain a few things to you, okay? And so I was interested because, I'm paying money to get this thing repaired all the time. Okay? I got a big old power tool. Well, so, and then he was explaining to me that the first time he ran into this, okay, is that he had this farm worker, okay, and he was complaining that every time his auger breaks, it's because there is a small, relatively little small, weak pin in the shaft, and it's always breaking, okay. Well, I go, well, that's what's happening with my big old, okay, drill. Well, and since he replaced the pin several times, okay, he might think it should be made stronger. That pin should be made stronger because it's always breaking. Okay? And that was basically how I arrived at the same thing. Well, and I got this pin in here, and it keeps breaking. Well, here's what I didn't understand. But what the worker dismissed and what I had dismissed as poor design is a deliberate choice by the designer. It's a deliberate choice by the designer. You see, a shear pin, that's what they call, okay, is easily replaced. Now, it is intended, listen to this part, it is intended to break before excess stress destroys more expensive parts of the auger. Do you understand? And it was the same thing with my drill. All the other components would heat up to a point, okay? And at that point, it reached a certain temperature, that pin would break. Okay? To force the user, you can't use it anymore, okay? Go and get a new pin. Put it in. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, from my perspective and from the farmer's perspective, that was really poor design. What I didn't understand that it was designed that way purposely to keep the other components from overheating and exploding. But in my world, that's poor design. And in the world of many people, we see things in the world and we go, that's really poor design. Man, God, if you really are God, you're a poor designer of that. And we don't understand that there's something bigger at play here. Okay? Do you understand that idea? Okay. No, so what I consider to be a flaw, it happened to be a feature saving me from even worse complications. Now, if we were to take complaints about vestigial organs, okay, in the human body, okay, and we misunderstood the design of the human body to fit into this, that we fit into this category of error, okay, well, theological arguments are useful, but not logically, okay, absolute, okay. You know, we get sick purposely. That's the alarm bell that goes off. Something is wrong before something else becomes worse. Are you following me? Okay. Now, I have a heart doctor. I have a cardiologist that I go to. You know, I got to that point in the stage of my life where I need to go and see a cardiologist, okay? And I'm having all kinds of issues, and I'm trying to figure out what's happening here, okay? Well, was that issue poor design? No. There is a system of alarms that is set up for me that something worse is about to happen. Go and get checked out, buddy, okay? So now, view in the context of what we would call normal human observation, okay? I mean, this takes on great potency. It takes on great potency, okay? In fact, the lengths required for some critics to dismiss these arguments speak of their value. Why do we have all of these arguments about artificial intelligence, intelligent design, and abiogenesis and so forth, okay? Because intelligent design does exist. Genesis does lead to life. Abiogenesis does not lead to life. Okay? Now, critics, and I had to go a long way to explain this because I realized that the question was not that easy. Okay? Critics of religion frequently concede that biology and nature give every appearance of being designed. Now, the only justification given for concluding otherwise is preference. That is because the existence of God or any other divine influence must be refuted at all costs. So they go to argue about, about biology and nature. Now, this comes across as very much like a poker player saying, listen to me. It strongly appears that I'm cheating, so please be sure to assume that I am not. For those lacking such bias, probability and common sense lend weight to the value of teleological arguments. Now we go back full circle to the very beginning when I told you this is also a philosophical position. Okay? Common sense, okay, and probability plays a big role, okay, in the teleological arguments for the existence of God. Now, I've attempted to try to answer something by way of illustration because let's be honest, we don't use the word teleological, okay, much in our daily conversation. We don't hardly ever use it, okay, in the pulpit or in a Bible study. We don't explain it, but we do engage in argument. You know, so and so doesn't believe this and doesn't believe that because of this, and you don't realize that you've gotten into what's called teleological arguments for the existence of God. We'll pick this up with our next question in our next class.